Hey guys, tonight we're heading back to the late 1100s, to a chilly stone manor, perched on the edge of a sheep-covered hill. The sun's not even up yet, but you're already awake because today is wedding eve, and in the medieval world, that's somehow more exhausting than the actual ceremony. You sit up in a straw-stuffed bed, stiff from a night of twitchy dreams, and the occasional snort from the pigs beneath the floorboards. Your chamber smells of damp wool and old bread, and your only candle is flickering like it might give up on life at any moment. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle to the window and lift the wooden shutter. Outside the manor's courtyard is already swarming with activity, a gaggle of servants, most of whom you barely recognize, are hauling baskets of turnips and spiky herbs through the mud. The cook is bellowing about a missing goose, and someone, probably your cousin, is practicing a lute badly and way too early. The air smells like damp hay, wet wool, and smoke. And somewhere beneath that, the faintest hint of rosewater soap, probably reserved for the bride. Not you. You're just a guest. Or maybe a cousin of the groom. Or a friend of the bride's fourth brother. It doesn't really matter. You're here, and that means you're involved. The atmosphere is thick with tension and cabbage steam. You're pulled away from the window by a knock on your door. No one waits for your answer. They barge in with an armful of linens, yellowing and stiff, and hand them to you with the enthusiasm of someone assigning hard labor. Today's washing day, they inform you, before vanishing. Of course it is, because nothing says impending marital bliss like beating clothes against rocks in freezing water. Mainstream fact. In medieval Europe, wedding preparations often began the day before the ceremony, involving the entire household, nobles and peasants alike. Tasks like laundering clothes, baking bread, brewing ale, and setting up sleeping arrangements could take hours, if not days. You're sent to the back garden, where half the village seems to be laundering something. The river's cold enough to sting, but that doesn't stop two aunties from arguing about whether the bride's dowry should have included more goats, or if one silver goblet was romantic enough. You try to scrub a tunic, but your fingers go numb. Someone tosses you a pair of linen underpants, clearly assuming you're stronger than you look. You start to suspect no one here knows your name. There's no time for formal introductions, though, because now you're needed in the kitchen. The goose has returned. Unfortunately, so has the smell. Inside, the cook waves a ladle like a weapon. "Help with the dough," she barks. You press your hands into the floury mound and realize it's more effort than writing vows. Not that most couples here write vows. Marriage in the medieval world isn't really about feelings. It's about alliances, land, and which side of the village owns that pond with the really fat ducks. You knead until your arms ache, then stagger out into the courtyard where someone's begun hanging garlands of dried herbs and mismatched cloth. A toddler is eating a daisy chain. No one stops them. Quirky tidbit. In some rural parts of England and France, during the 12th to 13th centuries, it was customary to decorate the wedding space with garlic lavender and sometimes even onion garlands to ward off bad luck, disease, and nosy neighbors. A bell rings faintly in the distance. Probably the priest arriving on his donkey, bouncing with a scroll tucked under one arm. He'll be staying the night likely in the grain loft, hopefully not allergic to hay. Someone grabs you to help polish pewter cups with a rag that looks like it used to be someone's undergarment. It's oddly satisfying, though, watching dull metal come alive under your fingers. Then comes the real test, hanging the tapestry. It's heavy woolen and decorated with what might be a unicorn or a malformed goat. You and 3 others hoisted above the hearth accidentally, knocking over a bench and at least one candle. Fortunately, only a little fire is involved. Nothing you can't stomp out. You collapse into a pile of straw by the fire, flushed and flour dusted. Around you, the house hums with anticipation. Someone's tuning the lute again. Badly. The cook is crying into a pot. The bride hasn't been seen since dawn, and a small dog is chewing on someone's borrowed shoes. You're exhausted, but strangely happy. Weddings in the medieval sense aren't about perfection. They're about chaos, obligation, and doing your part in a system that only makes sense if you squint hard enough. Still, when the door swings open and the bride finally appears, face-flushed veil, askew, holding a bundle of herbs and looking like she might bolt or burst into tears, you realize something soft is growing under all this rough fabric and clattering noise. Hope. However medieval it may be. The morning sun is barely over the treetops when you're pulled quite literally into the room where the bride is being dressed. It smells of old lavender, beeswax, and warm wool. The shutters have been flung open to let in light, and the air is chilly, but sharp, crackling, with the quiet terror of silk creasing the wrong way. Someone hands you a garment, heavy, gold-trimmed, and suspiciously damp in one corner, and gestures for you to hold it aloft while they attempt to wrangle it over the bride's head. You are now an official part of the wardrobe team, which sounds fancy but mostly involves holding things very still while being shouted at. The bride, for her part, stands stiffly, arms raised like she's being arrested by fashion. Her expression is somewhere between resignation and silent rebellion. She's young, certainly, though in this era that could mean anything between 12 and 17. Her hair has been oiled, braided, and looped so tightly around her ears that she looks vaguely like she's wearing cinnamon rolls. "Don't move," someone whispers. "It's not finished. It doesn't look finished. In fact, it looks like someone has tried to build a tent out of satin and regrets every decision along the way." But you say nothing, because it's her day. Sort of. Mainstream fact. In the medieval period, wedding garments were often the finest clothes a person would ever wear. For noble families, this meant silk fur embroidery and imported dyes. For peasants, it might simply mean their cleanest smock, possibly dyed with onion skin for a faint yellow hue. You glance around the room. It's not a bridal chamber. It's a multi-purpose space that yesterday held baskets of root vegetables. Now it holds about 7 women, 1 snoring baby, and a tapestry being used as a privacy curtain for changing. One of the bride's cousins is ironing the veil with a heated pan lid. Another is arguing with a midwife about whether the bride's new belt should sit above or below the rib cage. It's not glamorous. It's not elegant. But it's familial and oddly sweet. You're handed a pair of shoes leather stiff and so narrow they might belong to a woodland sprite. The bride puts them on anyway, wincing only slightly. Then someone laces up her sleeves and mutters a blessing that sounds suspiciously like a threat. There, the midwife says at last, fit for a contract. The bride sighs, fit for a market stall. They laugh. A small one, but it counts. Then comes the dowry discussion. The box arrives in a squeaky cart dragged by 2 teenage boys and a goose with no sense of boundaries. Inside the box, cloth bolts, 2 copper pans, a folded wool blanket, a silver hair comb, and a bag of coins sealed with wax. Someone double-checks the inventory. Twice. The bride doesn't look at it, because it's not really for her. It's for the groom's family. A transactional exchange that says, "Thank you for taking our daughter. Please enjoy this extremely practical linen set." Quirky tidbit. In parts of 13th century Italy and France, dowries could be fiercely negotiated, often including everything from livestock to land deeds to bizarrely seasonal fishing rights. In one record, a bride's dowry included the future milk of 2 unnamed goats. You move outside to where the groom is being prepared, which mostly means he's been poured a drink, shouted at by his uncle, and reminded not to throw up during the ceremony. He wears a tunic that might have been his father's. It's red, not because he likes red, but because red signifies wealth, warmth, and the hope that he won't die in battle or childbirth. The belt around his waist is decorated with small brass coins, and he keeps checking his breath by exhaling into his palm and grimacing. You overhear someone say he doesn't even know the bride's name properly. Something about it being Alice or Aline or the tall one from the next village. It's not romantic, but it's not cold either. He seems nervous. He wants to do it right. He has a dried flower tucked behind one ear, which feels almost like rebellion. Someone drops a bundle of linens in front of you and says, "Help fold these." They are stiff with starch and smell like lye. You fold them anyway. There's a rhythm to it now. Wedding prep is muscle memory for the village. Everyone knows what to do. You learn that some of these linens will be used in the bedding ceremony. Others will be handed out as gifts. One might end up in the church's stores. Another will be used to catch crumbs at the feast. Each has a place, a purpose, like people. Historians still argue whether wedding customs, especially involving clothing and linens, were followed strictly across regions, or whether they were more improvisational, adapting to local materials, beliefs, and even personal whims. The records very often written by clergy who disapproved of almost everything. A bell rings in the distance. The priest again, or possibly someone testing the new wine. In the garden, tables are being assembled. Bread is cooling on cloths stretched across hedges. A pig has escaped and is being lured back into the kitchen with bits of turnip. A woman in blue sings a song about a wedding night that involves a bear, which may be metaphorical or not. You sit on a low stool and begin sewing a last-minute repair on a flower garland. The flowers are wilting, but no one seems to mind. The sky is the kind of pale, hopeful gray that makes the world feel paused. Inside, the bride finally stands fully dressed. She looks like a statue carved from embroidered parchment, beautiful, rigid, entirely unsure if she should be smiling. She catches your eye for just a second, and you realize she's scared. Not of him, necessarily, but of the bigness of it all, the weight, the change. You nod. She nods back. That's enough. Because in this world where dresses pinch and dowries clink and people measure love in linen, it's the quiet gestures that matter most. The bells ring again this time, less like a test and more like a call to action. You step outside into the courtyard, where the air has shifted. It's no longer just full of smoke, chatter, and the occasional misplaced goose. It hums with something ceremonial. People start to gather like sheep around a hay cart, moving in slow, expectant clusters. You spot the groom again, looking like someone about to give a speech in a language he barely understands. His tunic is too tight across the chest, his boots are polished unevenly, and his posture suggests he's trying not to faint or vomit, or both. Someone pats his back. Someone else adjusts the dagger at his belt, just for show. A child runs past, nearly knocking over the jug of ale set aside for the priest. The groom mutters something under his breath, then looks skyward, as if appealing to some saint for immediate teleportation. The bride hasn't emerged yet, but her absence is felt like a held breath. You turn toward the church, a squat stone building that smells of damp hymn books and forgotten confessions. It isn't fancy. Its single stained glass window is cracked. The floor is uneven, and a dog has decided the altar steps make a perfect napping spot. But it's the only church within walking distance that isn't halfway collapsed. So here you are. Mainstream fact. In medieval Europe, church weddings became the norm by the 13th century, especially after the Fourth Lateran Council 1215, which mandated public marriage ceremonies and priestly blessing as the official form of matrimony recognized by the church. The priest, a man with a weary face and a wine-stained stole, begins laying out a few items: a cross, a bowl of holy water, a set of parchment scrolls. He glances at the gathering crowd, nods once, and promptly sneezes into his sleeve. This inspires one old woman to loudly declare it a good omen. Another whispers that it means infertility for the firstborn. You shrug. It could go either way. Back at the house, a small commotion signals the bride's entrance. Everyone turns, craning necks and straightening spines. The bride walks slowly, flanked by two older women, possibly her aunts, or maybe just anyone, with a stern enough jawline to look ceremonial. Her dress rustles like dry parchment. She doesn't look up. Instead, she walks with the eerie calm of someone descending into a mild form of doom. The music, if you can call it that, begins a string instrument with only 3 working strings played with the gusto of someone who really thinks it has 4. It screeches a tune vaguely melodic with pauses that suggest either emotion or tuning, quirky tidbit. In parts of rural France and England, it was considered bad luck if the bride tripped while walking to the church, but good luck if someone else did. In one bizarre case, a professional tripper was paid in cider to take a dive in front of the bridal party. You follow the procession into the church. There's no aisle like in modern weddings, just damp stone underfoot, flickering candlelight, and the smell of rosemary, tucked behind ears and into belts to ward off spirits, or at least the stench of nervous grooms. The priest begins. His voice is soft, gravelly. The words are Latin for the most part, though he adds a few vernacular phrases for the benefit of the guests. You catch something about unity, sacrament, and the sacred nature of lawful contracts. The word contract stands out. It always does. The groom mumbles his agreement. The bride follows, voice barely louder than the candles crackling beside her. Then comes the hand fasting. The priest wraps a strip of cloth, maybe linen, maybe silk, maybe an old altar rag, around their joined hands. He mutters a blessing. The crowd leans in. Somewhere in the back, a child sneezes. A goat bleats. A pot is dropped in the kitchen next door. The cloth is tied loosely enough for symbolism, but not enough to hinder movement. The couple stands there, bound together by fabric and obligation, and maybe a dash of affection. Historians still argue whether the hand-fasting ceremony was a holdover from pre-Christian pagan rituals or a purely practical way to symbolize the marital bond. Some argue it was mostly theatrical. Others claim it had legal weight before written contracts became standard. You move outside with the rest of the guests, the ceremony now complete. There is no rice or flower petals. Those would be far too valuable to throw. Instead, someone tosses a handful of oats. Another throws a handful of dirt. A third person, for reasons unknown, tosses a spoon. Laughter breaks out. The mood lightens. The newlyweds stand awkwardly, their hands still loosely bound. A child is pushed forward to offer them a mug of honeyed ale. The groom drinks first, then passes it to the bride. She takes a careful sip, eyes closed. There is a pause, then applause, gentle, polite, relieved. It is done. They are wed, which means, of course, the feasting is about to begin. But that's for later. For now, the newlyweds are led away from the church to a quiet corner of the garden where they're expected to share a moment alone. Except, of course, they're not alone. There's a small crowd watching from behind a hedge. You among them. The groom says something awkward. The bride laughs softly. It's not romantic, but it's something. You turn away. Give them privacy they won't get again until harvest. Back inside the house, the table is being reset. The floor has been cleared of spilled flour and anxious pacing marks. Candles are being replaced. Bread is being sliced. And someone, probably that cousin with the lute, is already tuning up again. You sit on a low stool and take a breath. One part of the wedding is over. Another part is about to begin. And in between is this moment, quiet, fragile, beautiful in its own uneven way. You barely have time to stretch your legs before the wedding feast begins. The tables, crude and wooden, are hastily assembled from whatever surfaces the manor can provide. Old doors, a plank across two barrels, the top of a broken chest, and covered in cloths that don't quite reach the edges. Candles flicker in iron sconces or half buried in turnip holders. It's rustic, it's chaotic, and it smells like cabbage, roasted meat, and wet wool. In other words, it's perfect. Guests begin to pour in, some dressed in their best tunics, patched and repatched with affection, others in furs that still carry the faint aroma of last winter. You see everyone from the grumpy blacksmith's wife to the distant uncle who only comes for free ale. Someone is already asleep in the corner, snoring beside a half-eaten apple. The bride and groom are seated at the center of it all, on chairs slightly taller than the rest, as if this makes up for the fact that neither of them knows what to say to each other yet. Their hands are now unbound, though they still sit awkwardly close, like two puzzle pieces from different boxes, trying to pretend they fit. Mainstream fact, medieval wedding feasts were an essential part of the celebration, often lasting several hours or days, depending on the family's wealth. These events weren't just for fun. They were public affirmations of the union and a way to feed your neighbors into good spirits. The food starts to arrive in a parade of uneven portions and questionable temperature. Trenchers, thick slabs of stale bread, used as plates, are handed out. On them, roasted chicken, stewed onions, soft cheese that smells a little too excited to be here, and something that might be parsnips or just confused carrots. Someone hands you a cup of mead, sweet and slightly sharp, like overripe apples, mixed with ambition. You sip cautiously. It's warm, possibly alive, but not bad. Across the table, two older women are arguing over whether the bride's mother cried enough during the ceremony. One swears she saw a tear, the other says it was just sweat. A third woman chimes in to say the crying doesn't count unless someone throws a kerchief. You chew slowly and decide not to get involved. The music begins again, because of course it does. The lute has not improved, but now it's joined by a drum, really just a stretched hide over a barrel, and a boy with a whistle that's technically a bird call. Together, they produce a sound that can only be described as committed. And then the dancing starts. Quirky tidbit. In many medieval villages, it was traditional to dance in circles around the bride, sometimes holding hands, sometimes waving herbs. In one region, guests would attempt to dance the lice out of phrase that was both metaphorical and depressingly literal. Someone pulls you from your seat and shoves you into the line. There is no rhythm, no pattern, just stomping and clapping and laughter. The bride is giggling now, trying not to trip over her shoes. The groom, red-faced and determined, looks like he's trying to defeat the concept of rhythm with sheer willpower. A dog joins in. You spin, you stomp. You nearly knock over a child. Someone claps in time completely unrelated to the music. But no one cares. Because it's not about skill. It's about being seen, being there, being alive. Back at the table, more food arrives. A whole roast pig, ears intact on a wooden platter. 2 women shriek with glee. Someone starts slicing it with what looks like a ceremonial dagger. A chunk flies off and lands in someone's ale. No one minds. More mead, more laughter. The priest joins in now, drunk on something stronger than wine. He tells a riddle about a nun, a farmer, and a turnip that ends with half the table choking on bread from laughter. Historians still argue whether these raucous celebrations were sanctioned or tolerated by the church. While clergy often presided over the ceremony itself, they usually turned a blind eye to the wine-fueled madness that followed. Some records suggest concern over excessive revelry. Others reveal priests leading the conga line, metaphorically speaking. Night falls. Candles multiply like fireflies in a jar. Shadows stretch along the walls. The room is warm, with food, bodies, music, and the gentle thrum of joy disguised as chaos. You spot the bride again. Her veil is askew. There's gravy on her sleeve. But she's smiling now, really smiling, and laughing at something the groom whispered in her ear. He looks relieved, maybe even proud. Maybe they'll make it. Maybe love doesn't always start with butterflies and poems. Maybe sometimes it starts with shared mead and mismatched shoes. You return to your seat, which is now shared by a snoring cousin and a loaf of bread you don't remember claiming. The feast continues louder and softer at once. The world blurs slightly at the edges like candle wax melting into itself. A toast is made. Someone drops a fork. 2 people argue about whether this is the best wedding in 5 years or 7. You smile and lean back. You've made it through the chaos, through the laundry, the garlic garlands, the cracked altar, the out-of-tune lute, and the hand-fasting. You've witnessed 2 people stitch their lives together in front of a crowd that may or may not remember it tomorrow. And now, with your belly full and your eyes heavy, you let yourself relax into the rhythm of the night. Because the party's still going, but your part for now is done. You're back on your feet again, drawn by the murmur of movement, away from the main hall. It's not that you meant to eavesdrop. Really, you were just following the scent of something sweet, baking near the hearth when you noticed the crowd thinning. Guests peel off in pairs or trios, slipping quietly into the darkened corridor that leads toward the bridal chamber. Yes, that chamber. It's time for the bedding ceremony. Don't look so nervous. Everyone else is pretending this is completely normal, and so should you. This is the part of the wedding that walks the tightrope between celebration and spectacle, an event equal parts ritual custom and awkward theatrical performance. Mainstream fact. In many parts of medieval Europe, it was customary for the community to witness the beginning of the marriage consummation. This varied from simply escorting the couple to their room and offering blessings to full-on bedding ceremonies where family and friends remained present until the couple were under the covers, sometimes even staying to witness the beginning of the act itself. Yes, really. You arrive just outside the threshold, blending into a quiet group of onlookers. The room is candlelit, modest, and slightly smoky. A bed, a proper feather mattress, stuffed with straw and layered with coarse linen, is pushed against one wall. On a small table rests a basin of water and a clean towel, as if the symbolism of cleanliness could redeem everything else that's about to happen. The bride stands beside the bed, her veil removed now, her hair unbraided and falling like waves over her shoulders. She looks both older and younger, in this lighting more real than ceremonial. Her hands are clasped, her knuckles are white. The groom is brought in by two of his friends, who are loudly suggesting he should smile more and drink less. He looks sheepish, like a boy caught stealing honey cakes. There's a cheer when he enters the room, not for him really, but for the event itself, the culmination of social expectation and deeply embedded tradition. You inch closer, not to stare, but because someone pushed from behind. The crowd is now fully gathered, a half-circle of relatives, neighbors, and drunk well-wishers, all eager to play their part. Quirky tidbit. In parts of Scandinavia and England, the wedding guests would throw stockings at the couple as they undressed, believing that whoever hit the bride or groom first would be the next to marry. It's unknown how effective this matchmaking method truly was, but it certainly made for a lively scene. There's a pause. Then someone, a matron with arms like ham hocks and a voice like a town bell, steps forward to lead the official proceedings. She says a short prayer, then gestures toward the bed. A few elderly women begin to sing. It's a tune about fertility with verses that veer wildly between poetic metaphors and farm equipment references. The bride is helped to the bed by her companions. The groom follows. They sit on the edge like they're waiting for a cart to arrive. More singing, more clapping, a toast, then a splash of water from the basin as someone ceremonially sprinkles the bedposts. Salt is tossed into the corners of the room to ward off bad luck or to keep rats away. Possibly both. You spot a man holding a roasted chicken leg aloft like a scepter, whispering that this will surely bless the union. You choose not to ask why. The couple begins to remove their outer garments layer by layer as the audience politely averts their gaze. Well, most of them. It's a strange dance between modesty and tradition privacy and communal responsibility. When they're finally down to their linen nightshirts, someone draws the curtain halfway across the bed. It's a signal. The rest of the group begins to filter out, laughing, teasing, blessing, and throwing more oats and breadcrumbs than anyone asked for. You leave too, stepping back into the cooling air of the corridor. Historians still argue whether these bedding ceremonies were truly about ensuring consummation or whether they served as symbolic closures to the legal transaction of marriage. Some records show that witnesses were present throughout. Others suggest that most of the ritual was performative, with the crowd leaving before any actual intimacy began. Back in the main hall, the music has resumed softer now, more lullaby than revelry. Those still standing are slow dancing in pairs or collapsed in cozy heaps along the benches. You reclaim your seat beside a warm hearth where the last embers flicker beneath a kettle of cider. Someone hands you a sweet cake, dense with honey, studded with figs, and slightly overbaked. You eat it gratefully, savoring every chewy, imperfect bite. The sounds of celebration become softer, still reduced to murmurs, distant laughter, and the clink of pewter cups. Above you, the rafters creak with the weight of wind and time. You wonder how many other weddings this hall has seen. How many couples began their lives in the same way, with awkwardness and public ceremony, with roasted pig and salty bread, with music that fought its own rhythm. You tilt your head back and close your eyes. The night has deepened. Outside, the stars peer down on the village with quiet indifference, and the moon casts pale shadows across the rooftops. Somewhere in the dark, a couple lies in bed, wrapped not just in linen, but in the warm, heavy layers of expectation and hope. And you've seen it all now, from the first tightening of a wedding gown to the final note of a fertility hymn. It's been messy, sweet, communal, odd, and deeply human. And somewhere in that tangle of ritual and bread and music, you found something oddly comforting. You wake to the clink of pots and the low murmur of voices, soft, early reverent. Morning has arrived, and the wedding feast has folded itself into memory like the last page of a storybook. You blink away the hearthlight still lingering in your eyelids and stretch your legs stiff from sleep and cider. The fire has died down to gray coals, and only a few guests remain scattered around the hall, curled up like cats among the benches. A couple of them snore gently. Someone is still hugging a jug. You, however, are now back on your feet, because today isn't just the day after the wedding. It's the beginning of the next chapter. The bride and groom, now officially husband and wife. They've made it through prayers and parsnips, awkward dances, and even more awkward bedding rites. But now comes the less glamorous part, living together. And in this age, that means one thing: expectation. Expectations from the family, from the village, from the church, and perhaps if they're very lucky from each other. Mainstream fact. In medieval Europe, marriage wasn't seen as a private romantic affair, but rather as a social contract between families. Once wed, the couple was expected to form a household unit, ideally a productive one, capable of managing land animals, children, and laborers, even if the couple barely knew each other. You wander outside. The morning air smells like damp hay and leftover stew. Chickens peck at oat crumbs left from last night's chaos. A dog stretches, yawns, then immediately resumes napping under a bench. In the small side yard, you see movement through the thin curtain of a window. The bride, her hair braided, now her face calm as sweeping, not some symbolic sweep for the guests to admire, but real practiced bone-deep motion. She's done this before, many times. This is her life now, tending to the hearth, measuring grain, knowing which hens are laying and which just squawk dramatically. The groom, meanwhile, is being shown the barn layout by the bride's father, who is already rattling off things like timber rot and mule feed. The groom nods solemnly, but his eyes wander part exhaustion, part disbelief. There's no honeymoon here. There's just Monday. Quirky tidbit. In some parts of medieval Germany and Bohemia, newlyweds were gifted a broom and a rooster on their first morning together. The broom symbolized the bride's domestic role, the rooster, fertility, of course, but also a not-so-subtle reminder of early mornings and noisy responsibilities. You continue your stroll through the edge of the village. Everyone seems to know, somehow, that they're married now. You pass a woman with a basket of laundry who winks at you, whispering about the couple's big night. Two boys run past, shouting kissy faces while pretending to retch dramatically. It's all very mature. When you return to the main house, you see the couple sitting side by side at the long wooden table. No crowds, no music, just bread porridge and silence. Except not quite silence. The bride asks if he likes honey in his porridge. He says yes. She scoops some into his bowl. He stirs. They eat. And there it is. A beginning, not with fireworks or dramatic music, but with honey and awkward spoons. You settle back on your bench content to watch the morning unfold. The priest returns briefly to bless the couple's new household. He mumbles through the prayer with all the energy of a hungover poet, then promptly accepts a slice of bread and exits. Blessings given, expectations set. Now comes the matter of land, or goats, or chores, or how many sacks of barley her family promised in the informal contract. Historians still argue whether early medieval marriages were primarily driven by family alliances and property exchange, or whether the church's increasing influence from the 12th century onward genuinely shifted attitudes toward personal consent and spiritual unity. Some claim love slowly crept in through the cracks of duty. Others say that's just modern romanticism painted backward onto a very practical institution. By mid-morning, the village has mostly returned to its rhythm. You pass by the blacksmith hammering away like nothing happened. The innkeeper's daughter is scolding a goose again. A child falls into a puddle and laughs like it's a sport. And in the distance, smoke curls from chimneys that burned too low during the festivities. But you feel the shift, because somewhere behind one of those doors is a newly married couple, learning how to breathe the same air, share the same bowl, negotiate who feeds the goats first, and possibly, if they're lucky, how to laugh at the same jokes. It won't always be pretty, or fun, or warm, but it will be theirs. You sigh and head toward the edge of the garden. The rosemary's still there, hung above the door to ward off bad luck. It's wilted now, its job done, or just beginning. You hear a cart rattle by. The driver waves. You wave back. And you realize something quietly lovely: weddings end, but marriages begin in the quiet. And sometimes that quiet sounds exactly like porridge being stirred in the early light of a Monday morning. Later in the day, you find yourself wandering down a muddy path behind the village toward the fields and hills that cradle this sleepy, medieval hamlet. The wedding is officially over, but that doesn't mean people have stopped talking about it. Far from it. If anything, the aftermath is when the real conversations begin. The commentary, the gossip, the deeply held opinions about who danced with whom and how well the roast pig turned out. And of course, the speculation. How long will they last? Will she settle into his family, or will she try to keep them near hers? Will he prove himself in the fields, or will he get caught gambling away the family's grain? In the medieval world, weddings were only the tip of the domestic iceberg. Now comes the delicate, sticky, community-saturated challenge of being a couple in public. Mainstream fact. In small medieval communities, marriages weren't private relationships. They were public affairs, continuously scrutinized by neighbors, priests, and family. Gossip served not only as entertainment, but as a way to enforce moral and social order. Your reputation as a spouse was everyone's business. You stop at the edge of a field where two old women are bending over a low wall, their aprons powdered with flour, talking animatedly. She walked in with his kerchief. One says her hands fluttering like bird wings. Bold, the other agrees, nodding. That's a message if I ever saw one. You try not to listen, but there's no real escape. Gossip is the ambient noise of medieval life. It slips through doorways, clings to market stalls, and follows you home in the hem of your cloak. And when it comes to new marriages, it's relentless. Back at the communal well, a young man is making a valiant attempt to explain to a group of children how he caught the bride's garter. Never mind that it was actually flung in the opposite direction and caught by the village goat, who promptly ate it. But no matter. In the minds of the listeners, he's already next in line for marriage. He puffs up accordingly. Quirky tidbit. In some medieval French villages, whoever caught the bride's garter during the celebration was expected to hang it above their door for a full year to soak up good fortune from the couple. By the time it came down, the smell could allegedly curdle milk. Romance, as you can tell, was very much alive. As you stroll through the market stalls, now resetting after the wedding lull, you hear more whispered judgments. She didn't even wear blue. I heard he stammered during the vows. They say she came from a family of sheep thieves. And yet beneath all the ribbing, there's an undercurrent of protection. This community, however, loud and nosy again, also cares in its own peculiar cabbage-scented way. They want the couple to succeed, because a good marriage reflects well on the village. It means fewer disputes, more children for the future workforce, and importantly, better feasts. Marriage is less about love than it is about social cohesion. You stop near the chapel. There, pinned to the church door, is a parchment written in looping, almost illegible script. It announces the union in formal Latin names, dates, blessings. The parchment is flapping gently in the wind like a sleepy flag, and next to it, scrawled in charcoal, someone has added, "She's too good for him." Another hand's response, "He can't even bake bread." A third, "Their pigs better match, or this won't last." You chuckle softly and move on. Historians still argue whether gossip in medieval communities was simply idle chatter, or whether it functioned as an informal justice system. Some evidence suggests gossip could damage reputations so severely that it led to shunning job loss, or worse, particularly for women. Others believe it was more performative, a kind of social theater that allowed people to express power in a rigid hierarchy. Eventually, you end up by the stream, away from the clamor, where the village laundresses are already back at work. Fabrics from the feast are being dunked, slapped against stones, and hung up like flags of surrender. They, too, are discussing the couple, not maliciously, just rhythmically. She seemed nervous, poor thing. Well, wouldn't you be? She'll do fine. Her mother taught her how to keep lentils from souring. That's enough. One woman hums a wedding tune while wringing out a particularly soiled tunic. It's oddly soothing, the way the gossip here is more about observation than judgment. You dip your fingers into the water. It's cold and alive, running over pebbles with more consistency than most of the village's marriages. Back in the village square, you see the couple again. She's helping stack borrowed platters. He's holding a broom incorrectly, but earnestly. They're surrounded by the people they've known their whole lives, people who have already chosen their sides in this love story, whether the couple asked them to or not. But they seem fine, tentative, tired, real. There's something grounding in that. As you walk back toward the fields, dusk slipping over the rooftops like a soft shawl, you reflect on what you've seen. A wedding isn't a finish line. It's a signal flare. It draws attention, sparks commentary, lights up the sky for just a moment, long enough for everyone to weigh in on how bright it was, or whether it was crooked, or if the sparks will last. And when the light fades, what's left is two people. And the gossip. Always the gossip. The next morning dawns not with fanfare, but with chickens. Loud, entitled chickens who seem unaware that anyone in the village was up late celebrating a binding social contract over turnips and roasted pigeon. You, ever the patient observer, blink awake to the steady rhythm of medieval life reasserting itself. Someone's already shouting about lost sheep. Someone else is throwing yesterday's potato peels to the pigs. And you're headed to the village square because today is market day, and if you want to understand marriage in the medieval world, you have to understand something far less romantic: economics. Mainstream fact: in medieval Europe, especially for peasant and artisan classes, marriage was often a financial arrangement. Dowries, joint property, and labor expectations weren't just details. They were the foundation of the match. A marriage without economic planning was like a feast without bread, noisy, flashy, and doomed to leave you hungry. In the square, stalls creak open like yawning mouths. One offers salted fish, packed in herbs and wrapped in linen. Another showcases turnips so knotted and gnarled they could pass for battlefield relics. The air smells of sweat smoke and someone's unwise attempt to reheat cabbage stew. You spot the newlyweds. Yes, already back at it. She's bartering for dried apples, clearly overpaying. He's talking to a man about a possible chicken exchange. It's all very glamorous. A village elder nods approvingly. They're learning, he grunts. And that really is the point. Marriage in this world isn't about the kiss at the altar or the bedding ceremony with an audience of giggling cousins. It's about mornings like this when the couple must figure out how to stretch a week's worth of eggs into 10 days of meals, when someone forgets to mend the fence and the goats eat the neighbor's herbs, when you realize your new partner has a weird way of folding linen and an even weirder way of making soup. You watch them negotiate over a basket of cracked walnuts. There's something tender about it, even in the haggling. Quirky tidbit. In parts of medieval Italy, women were sometimes required to publicly display the contents of their dowry chests during markets or festivals. It served two purposes: one, to demonstrate the family's wealth and status, and two, to settle disputes about who brought what into the marriage. Yes, it was part inventory control, part catwalk. Later that afternoon, you follow the couple back to their modest cottage. It's small, with a thatched roof and a crooked door that swings a little too far open. Inside, a fire crackles. The bed is made. The table is bare. She unloads the apples. He places the walnuts in a jar, already half full. Then, without much ceremony, they sit across from one another and start talking. Not romantic murmurs, but logistics. Who visits her parents next week? When to fix the hinge on the pig pen? Whether they should try planting barley next spring instead of rye. It's not glamorous. It's not poetic. But it is real. And in a time when half the world is dying of dysentery and the other half is arguing about saints, that's more than enough. Historians still argue whether medieval peasant marriages were happy. The records are thin, the evidence scattered between manorial rolls and confessionals. Some scholars argue that affection often bloomed after the wedding, especially in long marriages. Others suggest that emotional fulfillment was considered irrelevant compared to duty and survival. Back outside, you notice a neighbor woman stopping by their door. She brings a bundle of onions wrapped in an old cloth. No explanation, just a nod and a brief dry joke about how onions ward off bad luck and husbands who can't cook. It's the medieval equivalent of dropping off Tupperware. The couple thanks her, and you realize something important. They're not alone. Marriage may be between two people, but in this world, it exists within a web, a lattice of uncles, aunts, in-laws, priests, livestock taxes, saints, and soil. You step away, letting the evening light turn gold across the fields. A few children run past playing with sticks that they've optimistically declared to be swords. Someone nearby is singing a lullaby that sounds suspiciously like a drinking song slowed down. And somewhere behind you, the couple has begun their evening chores in tandem, gathering firewood, feeding the hens, checking the door latch. You take a deep breath. This, you think, is marriage. Not the moment of union, but the dailiness that follows, the habits that wrap around you like smoke from a low-burning fire, the ritual of gathering walnuts, the rhythm of boiling onions, the quiet understanding that it takes two to survive a winter. No songs will be written about today, but that doesn't mean it won't be remembered. Because long after the wedding, candles are snuffed out, and the musicians have moved on to other feasts. What remains is the small acts of care repeated again and again until the days stack together like stone walls, keeping out the cold. The following week begins with mud, thick, clinging, disrespectful mud that seems determined to pull your boots clean off your feet. You squelch down the village path, trying not to think about what percentage of this muck is just dirt and what percentage is something far less poetic. The air is damp, the sky gray, and the geese are honking with the urgency of a courtroom drama. But even in the face of endless laundry and animal droppings, life marches on. You're headed to the baker's cottage, not for bread, though the loaves smell heavenly, but for what happens behind the oven, stories, complaints, and all the little pieces that build up around a medieval marriage like moss on a stone. Because now that the wedding is over and the couple is settling in, the real test begins not of love, but of adjustment. Mainstream fact. In most of medieval Europe, couples lived in multi-generational households. A new bride might move in with her husband's parents, older siblings, or even grandparents. Privacy, as we know it, was rare. This meant that marriage wasn't just an adjustment to a spouse, it was an immersion into an entirely new family unit. At the baker's, the smell of singed crust lingers in the air as you settle onto a small wooden stool. An elderly woman, possibly the baker's mother, possibly his wife. It's unclear, is kneading dough like it owes her money. Next to her, a younger woman is recounting the trials of her first week as a wife. "It's the way he chews," she mutters, eyes wide with disbelief, "like a squirrel choking on barley. You stifle a smile. She's not angry, not really, just bewildered by the closeness of it all. We shared a blanket last night, she continues. He kept talking in his sleep. Something about pigs. I think he was arguing with one. The older woman doesn't look up. She simply grunts. Could be worse. At least he doesn't sing. You stay silent listening. Because this is what marriage sounds like in week 2, not declarations of eternal love, but whispered debates about blanket hoarding and phantom pigs. You step outside as the bell for midday mass tolls in the distance, and the village briefly pauses just enough to realign itself. And you realize everyone's watching, not out of cruelty, but curiosity. There's something magnetic about the start of a marriage, the way others peer in, as if inspecting a loaf in the oven, wondering if it'll rise, collapse, or burst into flames. Quirky tidbit. In medieval Poland, some villages hosted marriage inspections during harvest festivals. Neighbors would stop by the couple's home under the pretense of celebration, but really to evaluate how well the bride had settled in, how tidy the cottage looked, and whether the groom had gained or lost weight. It was like a nosy Yelp review disguised as a party. That evening, you return to the couple's home. They're sitting by the fire, not speaking, but not out of anger. It's the companionable silence of two people learning to occupy the same airspace without needing to fill it. She's mending a tunic. He's polishing the blade of a hoe. The fire crackles softly, and then, out of nowhere, he says, "I've fed the goats already." She glances up, surprised. Even the loud one. He nods, especially the loud one. She smiles, and there it is, a victory, not of great romance, but of small kindness, of shared responsibility, of knowing that someone else will do the thing without being asked. It's not much. It's everything. Historians still argue whether affection in medieval marriages was common. While courtly love was glorified in literature, the emotional lives of average peasants are harder to trace. Some argue the absence of written declarations implies emotional distance. Others believe deep connection existed in mundane acts, tending animals, sharing bread, showing up with firewood before the frost hit. You linger at the door just beyond the light of the hearth, letting the warmth brush your cheeks. In the corner of the room, you spot the rosemary bouquet from the wedding, now dry, a little brittle but still fragrant. She hasn't thrown it out, not because she's sentimental, perhaps, but because in this world, every sprig of rosemary has a purpose. It repels insects. It sweetens stew. And if legends are to be believed, it brings clarity to new brides struggling to figure out whether their husband's snoring can actually bend the laws of physics. The next morning, they walk together to the fields. Their footsteps are in rhythm. They don't hold hands. They don't need to. And you once again trailing behind at a respectful narrative distance, think this is marriage, not in the songs, but in the silences. Today begins with laundry, because of course it does. In the medieval world, grand declarations of love are rare, but undergarments still need scrubbing. So you find yourself down by the stream again, where water glides over rocks like it's got secrets to keep, and the village's washing stones have heard every gripe about husbands, mothers-in-law, and leaky roofs. The couple is there too, each with a bundle of linen and a look of weary commitment. She's already elbow deep in suds, slapping the cloth rhythmically against the stones. He's trying to wring out a tunic and failing with admirable determination. Water sloshes, fabric clings. He curses under his breath, not with vulgarity, but with the defeated tone of a man who's realizing he brought the woolens instead of the linens. She laughs. And that laugh, that's where today's lesson begins. Mainstream fact, humor was a quiet but critical part of married life in medieval times. While records rarely mention jokes or playful teasing letters and plays from the period, suggest that laughter, especially in private, was a form of emotional currency between spouses. It helped couples survive poverty, illness, war, and the occasional in-law invasion. As the couple continues their wet slapstick ballet, you learn a lot. Not just about how to get goose droppings out of a cloak, but about the language of everyday marriage. Small glances, quiet jokes, shared groans when the soap slips downstream. He finally manages to hang a damp shirt on a low branch. She grins. You put it over the poison ivy. He yanks it back down so fast you hear a seam rip. She doesn't say, "I told you so." She just hands him another shirt. A flock of ducks waddles by like they own the riverbank. He bows mockingly. Make way for the nobility. She curtsies, and just like that, the morning feels warmer. Quirky tidbit. In parts of medieval Germany, newlyweds were sometimes forced to perform public tasks together, carrying water, turning a millstone, or chopping firewood as a kind of community test. If they could laugh while failing, and they often did, the onlookers declared it a good omen. Later that day, you trail the couple to the village square. There's a dispute unfolding, some kind of issue, with a borrowed cart and a goat that ate someone's hem. You stay back as they approach the cluster of villagers. Instead of letting her husband speak for them both, the wife steps forward. Sheep wandered into our field because the latch was broken, she says calmly. We fixed it, and we returned the goat. A murmur passes through the crowd. No yelling, no grandstanding, just honesty. Then the groom steps up, holding a fresh jar of honey. We brought this, he says, for the trouble. Another murmur, this time approval. They leave the square in silence, but there's a hint of pride between them. A shared glance that says, we handled that. You follow them back through the market. They walk a little taller now. Historians still argue whether medieval women truly held power in marriages or whether their influence was simply informal. Some argue that women had significant authority in domestic decisions, especially in peasant households. Others believe their autonomy was constrained by law and custom, with only rare exceptions. What's certain behind every silent man was often a woman whispering the smarter plan. That night at the hearth, they eat in comfortable silence. Bread broth, a little wine. You watch as she mends his tunic, yes, the one that lost a fight to the poison ivy. He sharpens a knife, not because it's urgent, but because it gives his hand something to do. "I liked what you said today," he mutters, eventually. She doesn't respond, just nudges a bowl of turnips toward him like a quiet thanks. Outside, the moon rises over the thatched roofs like a sleepy eye. The fire pops. Somewhere an owl makes a noise that sounds vaguely judgmental. And then he laughs. A real one. She raises an eyebrow. "You made that face again," he says. "The one like someone just put vinegar in your ale." She snorts. "You're the one who drinks vinegar when he thinks no one's watching. I thought it was wine. You said it was good for digestion." They both laugh now, real and loud and tired. And as the night settles around them like a soft, scratchy wool blanket, you realize this is the heartbeat of medieval marriage. Not just cooperation, but humor. Not comedy as performance, but as resilience. And when they finally crawl into bed, yes, the same bed that creaks like a guilty door, you notice something sweet. She's left her slippers turned out ready for the next morning. He's tucked the dog inside the blanket's edge so she doesn't have to. No grand gestures, just small ones, repeated, until they become something sacred. By the time autumn fully arrives, the mornings feel different, crisper, quieter, edged with the kind of chill that makes you pull your cloak tighter and wish for another hour in bed. The village is busy preparing for the colder months, and so is the couple. You wake to the sound of firewood being chopped, of barrels being rolled, and of someone muttering very unromantic things about the state of their thatched roof. Inside their modest home, they're moving in practiced rhythm now, no longer hesitant, no longer negotiating over every step. She stokes the fire while he grinds dried herbs into jars. There's a comfort in how they move around each other, like dancers who've forgotten the choreography, but learned the steps by heart. This is no longer a new marriage. It's simply marriage. Mainstream fact. In medieval Europe, especially in rural communities, there was no formal honeymoon. Newlyweds were expected to return to work immediately after the ceremony, if not the next morning, then certainly by the end of the week. Marriage wasn't considered a break from life. It was considered the start of a new workload. The couple's days now revolve around routine feeding animals, fixing fences, preparing dried meats, and preserving fruit. It's not glamorous, but it's essential. And through it all, they've developed a language that requires no words, just gestures, timing, and small acts of consideration. You watch as he adds an extra log to the fire before she wakes. You see her fold his spare tunic and place it by the door before he leaves. No declarations, just readiness. There's a kind of peace in that, in a world that often makes a spectacle of beginnings, weddings, births, declarations. It's easy to forget the beauty of the middle, the days that go unnoticed, the chores that go uncelebrated, the quiet harmony of shared labor. They now cook meals without discussion. He preps the pot. She adds the barley. She slices onions. He winces and offers a cloth for her eyes. You'd almost call it romantic if it didn't smell so strongly of onions. Quirky tidbit. In some regions, villagers believed that if newlyweds could spend 40 days without arguing while preparing pickled vegetables together, their marriage would be blessed by the saints. If they argued, however, the pickles would turn sour literally and metaphorically. This was known as the pickle test. Later that day, a visitor arrives. It's her cousin from a nearby village. She brings gossip, dried mushrooms, and stories of another couple who split after just one season. They couldn't agree on how to ferment cabbage, she says, wide-eyed. The wife shrugs. You have to listen to the cabbage, she says, deadpan. The husband nods solemnly. It whispers. You blink. They're joking. Again. And it feels different now. Not the bright, sharp humor of new love, but something gentler, worn in. The kind of joke you tell, not because it's funny, but because it's part of your rhythm, a thread in the shared tapestry. That evening, they walk together to the chapel, not for any grand reason, just to sit, breathe, and light a candle. You trail behind boots, crunching in the newly fallen leaves. Inside the chapel, it's cold but peaceful. The walls smell faintly of wax and moss. She kneels, lips moving silently. He sits beside her, hat in hand, eyes closed. When they leave, they don't speak. They don't need to. They walk side by side through the dark, past sleeping animals and shuttered windows, under a sky littered with stars. Their lantern swings between them, casting twin shadows that stretch and sway like dancers across the path. You realize something, there's no drama left. And that's the point. Historians still argue whether emotional companionship was expected in medieval marriages. Some say the idea of marrying for love is a modern invention. Others point to letters, poetry, and local legends that suggest emotional intimacy was not only present, but quietly treasured. As usual, the truth is somewhere in between. Back at the cottage, he closes the latch with one hand while balancing a pail in the other. She hangs her shawl by the door, then pulls the window curtain closed with a whisper of cloth. They move like they've been doing this forever, even though they haven't. You sit by the hearth, invisible as ever, and watch as they fall into their nightly rituals. She brushes her hair by firelight. He lines up his tools for the next morning. They eat a few scraps of bread and cheese in silence, punctuated only by the occasional hiccup from the dog. No kisses tonight. No sighs. Just comfort. That's what this is now. Not a spark, but a steady ember. Not a beginning, but a becoming. And when they finally slip under their wool blanket, two figures beneath one roof, two stories becoming one rhythm, you let yourself exhale. Because this too is history. Not just the battles and the kings and the saints, but this, the quiet marriages that shaped villages and generations, and the very language of what it means to stay. There's a market today. You can tell by the way the village hums differently, like it's leaning forward, expectant, waiting for coin to change hands and gossip to be traded like apples. You follow the couple through the morning mist, your steps light, your ears perked. Something feels different today, quieter. Not in a bad way, more like the air before a decision. The wife carries a small bundle, dried herbs, hand-stitched cloths, a few beeswax candles. Nothing grand, but her back is straight, and there's a flicker in her eyes like she's walking towards something more than just a crowd. They reach the stalls, set up in uneven rows along the packed dirt lane. Farmers shout over each other. Someone's goat tries to steal a carrot. Children chase each other between skirts and wheels. It's alive with ordinary chaos. And then you see it. She steps away, not rudely, just with purpose. She leaves her husband at the edge of the crowd and walks toward a shaded corner where a few women have set up tables of their own. One of them scoots over. The wife lays down her bundle. No announcement, just an act. She's selling, on her own. He watches her from a distance, doesn't interrupt, doesn't hover. He just smiles. Mainstream fact. In many parts of the medieval world, including Western Europe, married women could and did engage in economic activity, especially in markets. While laws often restricted female property rights in practice, women sold produce, cloth, and crafts. Some became known traders. Their husband's presence wasn't required to make a sale, even if his name was sometimes on the ledger. As the day wears on, she haggles like a veteran. She gives the boy who buys a candle an extra twist of thread for free. She scolds a butcher for trying to shortchange a girl. She takes coin with one hand and counts it behind her back without looking. Later, she hands a small pouch of coin to her husband. He shakes his head. "It's yours." She raises an eyebrow. "Yours too." "No," he insists. "This was your work." And just like that, the pouch disappears into her belt. Not because she's being selfish, but because he meant it, and she believed him. Quirky tidbit. In medieval Venice, widowed or divorced women who owned businesses were called femina soluta, unbound women. They wore specific headscarves to indicate their independence and had the right to own property and appear in court. While not the majority, these women were respected and even envied in merchant circles. On the walk home, you trail beside them as the sun dips behind the treetops. She hums. He listens. She flicks a pebble off the path. He catches her hand without looking and tucks it into his elbow. It's not romantic. It's real. Back home, they light a single lamp. The house smells faintly of beeswax and turnips. She counts her remaining candles. He lines up the day's purchases. They speak little, but the silence is full. Then she says, almost as if remembering something late, "I might do it again next week." He nods. "You should." She hesitates. "And if I go to the next town's market?" He shrugs. "You'll take the mule." Just like that, a door opens. Not a grand gesture, not a contract, just permission, offered casually, received. quietly. It changes everything. Historians still argue whether marriage in the Middle Ages allowed space for women's autonomy. Some believe women were overwhelmingly controlled by their husbands with little freedom beyond the home. Others point to court records, wills, and guild documents suggesting many women, especially those with cooperative spouses or family networks, wielded significant informal power. That night you find her sitting alone by the fire. She's not sewing or cooking or tending. She's just still, thinking. He walks in holding a cup of watered wine, offers it without a word. She takes it. She says, "I remember when I thought you'd never let me do anything alone." He shrugs again. "I didn't think you wanted to." "I didn't," she says, "until I did." They both sip from their cups. The fire pops like a punctuation mark. The dog snores. A moth flutters toward the lamp. She adds, "It felt good." He says, "You looked like you'd been doing it for years." She grins. "Maybe I have. Just not with my own table." He reaches for her hand, not to lead, not to take, just to hold. And for a while they sit in that quiet glow, two people who've learned that marriage isn't just about living together. It's about letting each other live. Even in a world of thick laws and thicker expectations, they've found a soft spot. And in that softness, freedom. The wind begins to change. You feel it before they do, subtle like a whisper under the door, tugging at the thatch, rustling the trees. Autumn is deepening, slipping into the first hints of winter. And with it comes the quiet anticipation of the feast days. They rise earlier now. The light arrives late, pale and slow, and there's more to do with fewer hours. Preserving root vegetables, curing meat, sealing jars. The village is thick with the scent of smoke and spice. Everyone's hoarding warmth blankets, candles, and stories to last the long nights. You notice the couple's pace is more deliberate, not because they're tired though they are, but because they've learned how to do this, the rhythm of it, the nonverbal flow. They work like two hands of the same body. This morning she's stitching a thicker lining into his cloak. He's sharpening the small axe for firewood, testing it on a knot of oak that spits back in protest. The chores are colder now, but the house is warmer. They don't speak much, but when they do, their words are slower, rounder, like bread dough left to rise in the corner. You don't rush speech in this season. You let it rest. Mainstream fact. In many medieval European villages, winter preparations began as early as late September. The colder months could be brutal, with limited food and little sunlight. So couples often worked together to preserve as much as possible, salting meat, drying apples, boiling down stock, spinning wool, and preparing tallow for candles. These were joint efforts, even if records rarely mention the emotional labor behind them. One afternoon, while cutting firewood behind the house, the husband slips, not dramatically, just enough to catch his breath, enough to pause. She hears the silence. You watch as she emerges from the cottage apron, dusted with flour. She doesn't panic, doesn't scold, just picks up the axe, gives it a spin, and offers a hand. He stands, brushes himself off, takes the axe back. They say nothing. They don't need to. Quirky tidbit. Some medieval households believed that if a husband and wife chopped wood together in silence, their winter would be calm and argument-free. If they bickered during the task, it was considered an omen that their fire would burn poorly and their food would spoil. Later, inside, they unpack a chest of saved items, extra wool, last year's candied walnuts, a piece of dyed fabric too precious to cut. They sort through it together, deciding what to keep close and what to gift. Her fingers linger on a scarf. His eyes pause on a carved whistle from childhood. I thought this was lost, she says. You gave it to me, he answers. I did. For your birthday, he adds, after the storm. She blinks. That was 3 years ago. He nods. You were worried we wouldn't have music again. She shakes her head softly, laughing. I was always dramatic in the winter. He doesn't disagree. But he hands her the whistle anyway. Historians still argue whether emotional memory played a large role in medieval domestic life. Some argue that without written diaries or widespread literacy, personal moments vanished into the ether. Others point to oral traditions, religious rituals, and seasonal customs as evidence that memory was preserved not in writing, but in repetition, in doing, in singing, in cooking, in simply remembering together. The first snow comes that night. It's not loud, just a soft hush against the roof, like someone breathing above the cottage. You stand by the window and watch it gather. The world outside disappears into pale gray. She puts more straw in the dog's basket. He refills the woodpile. Then they sit, together, drinking something hot from shared mugs, a thin broth with too much pepper and not enough salt. But it's warm, and theirs. She reads aloud from a prayer card. Her voice is low, not reverent exactly, but steady. He closes his eyes, letting the rhythm of her words drift over the fire's slow pops and the wind's wandering moans. Afterward, they play a game of counting. Things we've learned this year, she begins. 1, he says. You're better at haggling than I am. She grins. 2, you can't tell poison ivy from a clothesline. He groans. 3. She continues, we don't need as many candles as we think. 4, he says we'll always forget where we stored the extra pickles. They keep going until the fire burns low, and then nothing, just quiet, not empty, not awkward, just the kind of quiet you earn, the kind that holds you, not haunts you. They move toward the bed as one practiced and familiar. You can tell how they pull the blanket now, with care not only for each other's comfort, but for the way the corners tuck just right. There's comfort in the fold, in the weight of shared sleep, in the way their breathing starts to sink again. Tomorrow it might be colder, but tonight, everything feels enough. And maybe that's what marriage becomes. Not grand love stories, but small, warm winters. The village has begun to turn inward. Doors stay closed longer. Smoke rises in thinner lines from every chimney, and voices are muffled behind thick wool and shuttered windows. But inside the couple's cottage, something else is shifting. Not the air, not the temperature, but something quieter, deeper, a kind of settling. They still speak, of course, still trade small jokes and passing complaints. But now you sense the weight of history between them, not the grand kind written in books, but the kind lived through spoons and socks, weather and memory. This morning, she wakes first. It's barely dawn. She doesn't rush. She just lies still for a moment, listening to the creak of the roof, the wind pressing against the shutter, the steady breath beside her. Then she rises and adds wood to the stove. No ceremony, just the quiet act of keeping someone warm before they know they're cold. Mainstream fact. In most medieval homes, the woman managed the hearth, not only cooking, but maintaining the fire, which was the single most vital element in daily survival. A cold hearth could mean no meals, no light, no warmth. Women developed expert knowledge of firewood types, kindling arrangements, and smoke flow. In this way, they were the keepers of life itself, even if no one ever wrote it down. When he wakes, the cottage already smells faintly of oats. She's humming, but not to him, just to the task. He doesn't interrupt, doesn't ask what's for breakfast. He just sits beside her and peels a few apples that have gone soft around the edges. They eat in silence, not awkward, just companionable. You've come to expect that now. After breakfast, they divide the day's tasks not with a list or a plan, but by habit. She patches a hole in his tunic. He repairs a shutter. Mid-morning, she laughs at something he says. Not a belly laugh, just a snort that escapes before she can stop it. He grins. Mission accomplished. Quirky tidbit. In some medieval German villages, there was a winter custom called Feast of the Quiet House, where neighbors would leave small offerings, cheese, dried pears, herbs outside the home of the couple, considered the most peaceful. The tradition wasn't about wealth or productivity, but about the subtle art of coexisting without fuss. Later that day, a neighbor stops by. She's young, newly married, eyes darting with worry. You recognize that look. It's the same one the wife used to wear. I don't know if I'm doing it right, the girl says, voice tight. The wife doesn't answer immediately. She pours 2 cups of cider, hands one over, sits. Then softly, if you're worrying, you're already trying. That's more than enough some days. The girl nods, uncertain. The wife continues. Sometimes it's not about feeling in love every day. Sometimes it's about choosing to be kind when you're tired. The husband standing by the door with his coat half on adds, and learning when to leave the room before you say something stupid. The girl laughs. It's a start. Historians still argue whether medieval marriages prioritized emotional resilience. Some argue they were strictly practical arrangements, property, alliances, reproduction. Others point to courtship letters, religious writings, and folk songs that describe the subtle ways couples grew into affection over time, especially in long winters when external distractions faded. That night you notice the wife pulling a bundle from under the bed. Its fabric dark, warm, carefully folded. A surprise? No, a gift. She's been working on it for weeks, bit by bit. A new winter tunic, not flashy, but sturdy, soft at the edges. She doesn't say much as she hands it over, just, "You'll need it when it gets colder." He runs a hand over the seams, touches the inside lining. It's warmer than he expected. He doesn't thank her. He just puts it on, and that's enough. Later, they sit together again. No cider, no visitors, just them. She works a bit more on another patch. He sharpens the kitchen blade. Occasionally, their eyes meet, not with meaning, just in rhythm. You start to understand something. Love in this house is not a feeling. It's a repetition of choosing, of listening, of showing up with oats before the sun, of building warmth into a tunic without needing a birthday, of patching the roof and the shirt and the day, again and again, without applause. The fire burns low, the wind rises, but they sit, and the silence is full of everything that once was loud. And in that stillness, you finally feel it. This isn't the middle of the story anymore. This is the heart. Snow has thickened into its winter permanence now. What once flurried lightly across rooftops now banks along the stone walls, pressing in with a quiet persistence. The world beyond their cottage has gone muffled. Boots don't clack, wheels don't turn, and even voices seem to hang in the cold air, suspended like breath. But inside the couple has settled into a kind of soft routine that only years and shared winters can build. You notice how the day begins slower now, not out of laziness, but wisdom, the kind of wisdom that says the sun won't rise any faster if you rush to meet it. She wakes before him again, always does now. Her movements are measured, a choreography of memory. She adds the right kindling to the stove without needing to look, folds the same wool shawl over her shoulders, tucks a curl of hair behind her ear. Every step speaks to a life of knowing where everything belongs, including him. Mainstream fact. In medieval homes, the winter months were some of the most socially isolating, especially in rural regions. Villages might go days without communication due to snow flooding or blocked roads. Couples became each other's only consistent companions for weeks at a time. Emotional closeness wasn't just romantic, it was survival. He stirs around mid-morning, groaning like a barn door. She hands him a cup of broth before he asks. He mutters something unintelligible that might be "thank you" or "how'd you know," but she just smiles. You sense the answer has become obvious. He eats beside the hearth, rubbing one foot against the other under the chair. She joins him, but not to eat, just to sit. They watch the fire for a long while, saying nothing. The flames crackle in slow rhythms, throwing warm shadows onto the floorboards. At some point, she leans her head on his shoulder. He doesn't shift or straighten up. He just lets her rest. Quirky tidbit. In parts of medieval Scandinavia, there was a custom where married couples would share a special bench known as a stillness seat, built into the hearth wall. It was just wide enough for two and considered sacred during long winters. Couples believed that if they sat together on it each night, the warmth would transfer into their marriage and keep away melancholy. By midday, they start to move again. She kneads a small lump of dough, enough for 2 small loaves. He checks the tools in the shed, not to use them, just to know they're there. That's the thing about these quiet seasons. Activity slows, but the desire to be ready never fades. You catch a small moment that would have meant nothing a year ago. She drops a bit of flour on the floor. He bends and wipes it without a word. She notices, but doesn't say thank you, because kindness here is baked into the floorboards now, and gratitude doesn't always need air. Historians still argue whether medieval domestic life offered true companionship between spouses. Some suggest that patriarchal control made intimacy impossible. Others believe the long insular winters created space for bonds that went unrecorded, but were deeply felt, expressed not through grand gestures, but shared chores and quiet gestures of care. Later that evening, they pull out a small worn board. You've seen it before. A game made from stones and lines etched into old wood. They play slowly, absently, neither really trying to win. It's not about strategy anymore, it's about repetition, the comfort of patterns. She teases him for making the same move every time. He feigns outrage. She raises an eyebrow. You think you're hard to predict? He laughs. You married me anyway. They keep playing. Eventually, one of them wins. But no one cares. It's the kind of game where the victory is just an excuse to keep sitting close. Outside, the snow falls harder now, not in sheets, but in the steady way that lets you know it won't stop anytime soon. The shutters creak. The wind whistles low under the door. Inside, they light 2 candles, not because they need more light, but because 2 lights feel warmer than 1. She pulls out a bit of embroidery she's been slowly finishing, a pattern of vines and stars. He watches for a while, then sharpens a pencil stub to make notations in an old book. You notice he pauses now and then, just to look at her, not out of surprise, out of habit. She catches him once and smiles. You keep staring. He shrugs. It helps me remember you. She tilts her head. I'm right here. Sure, he says, but I don't want to forget what you look like when you're not watching me. That makes her pause. Then she says softly, all right, then remember this, and goes back to her stitching. He watches her a little longer. You sit back, breathing in the thick, slow air of evening. It smells like bread and beeswax and pine smoke. You realize that while the snow outside grows deeper, the house inside has become warmer, not from fire alone, but from the quiet choices made daily. the small mercies, the softness earned by surviving so many hard seasons together. And as they tuck into bed once more, shoulders brushing under layers of wool, you hear one final sound before sleep claims them both. The echo of shared laughter caught between silence and snow. You wake to the sound of ice sliding from the roof like a sleepy animal stretching in the morning sun. The long freeze is easing just barely. You see it in the way the window frost softens around the edges, the way the logs in the stack creak as they thaw, and in the way her hands move faster, again, less burdened by the cold. The village hasn't stirred yet. But inside this cottage, spring is already whispering its way back in. She's humming again, something unfamiliar this time. Not the lullabies she used during the harshest nights. Something lighter. Maybe it's just her way of celebrating warmth without words. He notices it too. What's that tune, he asks, still half asleep. Voice gravelly. I don't know, she says. It just came to me. Keep it, he mutters. Feels lucky. They share a half smile, eyes still a little puffy from dreams. But their bodies seem more awake, more willing now. The stiffness in their joints has retreated a bit. The way they move through the house has loosened, not rushed, but unburdened. Mainstream fact, in the late Middle Ages, the arrival of early spring was marked not just by planting or festivals, but by deeply personal rituals inside the home. People adjusted their bedding, cleaned their hearths, and often rewrote domestic calendars to align with the shifting light. It wasn't merely a change in season, it was a reawakening of the household. The shutters opened for the first time in weeks. Dust flutters in the golden light. She sneezes, and he hands her a rag before she asks. They clean in tandem, wordlessly, not because they mind the dust, but because the sun has returned, and dust looks different in sunlight. It becomes something to address, not just endure. You watch them strip the bed, beat the rugs, shake out their coats. A feather escapes from a cushion and dances in the air for a moment too long. She reaches for it, misses, laughs. Still faster than me, he says. She raises an eyebrow. For now, quirky tidbit. In 14th century France, couples would sometimes perform a march, cleansing, a tradition of throwing old items out of the home while reciting short rhymes to ensure harmony and fortune. The ritual wasn't religious. It was emotional housekeeping, a shared attempt to reset their space and, symbolically, their relationship. Later in the day, they make something together, a pot of soup, but not the thick, heavy kind. It's lighter, with foraged greens, bits of dried onion, the last of the barley. They taste as they go, offering each other spoonfuls over the fire, debating whether it needs salt. They decide it doesn't. That afternoon, a neighbor boy drops by with a message lambing has begun in the outer pasture. The village is waking up. First lamb of the season, the husband says. New Year's begun, she replies. You realize they're not talking about calendars. That evening they pull their chairs closer to the fire, not out of necessity but for comfort. Her hands rest on her lap. His feet cross beneath the table. They don't touch, but the space between them is full of warmth of awareness. She says, "It's funny how long the winter felt this time." He nods. "And how short it'll seem when we look back." She thinks for a moment. "That's true for most things, isn't it? Especially love," he says. And just like that, it's said. Historians still argue whether love in medieval marriages was considered necessary. Some argue it was irrelevant to the purpose of marriage, economic, religious, social. But others argue that, while rarely documented in explicit language, love was present in gestures, endurance, and the ways couples adjusted to each new season, both in weather and in life. Before bed, she unrolls a small parchment, an old recipe her mother had written for a spring cake made with eggs and honey. She hasn't made it in years, maybe not since the war. He looks over her shoulder, nods approvingly, and begins to fetch the ingredients without question. She doesn't stop him. Tomorrow they'll bake it, not because there's a festival, not for guests, not for tradition, just because they can. That night sleep finds them quickly. The house is cleaner, the air lighter, the days longer. But more than anything, you sense that their love, like spring itself, has thawed into something softer. Less about surviving together, more about choosing to stay when surviving isn't the point anymore. You lean back, listening to the faint rustle of blankets, the whisper of wind, no longer biting. And just before everything goes still, you hear her say so softly, you almost miss it, "I'm glad we kept going." And he answers, "There was never a question." The morning sun spills across the wooden floor, like honey, slow and deliberate. You feel the difference immediately, not just in the light, but in the air. It's warmer, fuller, carrying the scent of soil instead of snow. Outside, the earth is beginning to breathe again, and inside the cottage, they are too. She's already at the small table by the window, sorting dried seeds into a clay dish. Her fingers move with the same care she once gave to embroidery or patching a tunic. Now the care is for sprouts not yet born. He walks in quietly, but she knows he's there. "Sleep?" she asks. "Well enough," he replies, though you can hear the creak in his voice. She doesn't comment. She just pushes a cup of warm cider across the table without looking up. Mainstream fact. In the late medieval period, especially in agrarian societies, seed keeping was a domestic task often managed by women. Not only were they responsible for selecting which seeds were worth saving, they also memorized planting times, crop rotations, and family-specific tricks passed down through generations. These were not formal sciences, but they were precise, intuitive, and deeply relational. After breakfast, they walked the garden together. The snow's retreat has left puddles and patches of stubborn ice, but the soil is visible again, dark, wet, promising. She kneels in a corner and presses her palm into the earth. He watches her, says nothing, but you know he's checking her posture, ready to help if she strains. She doesn't. Not today. He pulls a rake from the wall and begins clearing fallen twigs. They don't speak much, only when needed, because spring is loud enough on its own. Quirky tidbit. In certain parts of medieval England, couples who planted gardens together were said to be married twice, once by law and once by the land. Superstition held that if a couple could agree on the placement of herbs, they'd argue less in the home. Sage by the door meant patience. Time by the window meant laughter. By midday, they've dirtied their knees and torn an old sleeve, but neither complains. She pauses to lean on the fence post, brushing sweat from her brow with the back of her hand. He passes her a ladle of cool water from the rain barrel. They drink like pilgrims, eyes closed, grateful. And then, without meaning to, he says it. You remember our first garden? She nods. You overwatered the radishes, he teases. You built the rows. Crooked, she counters. They grin. You cried when the crows ate the first sprouts, he says. I cried because you said I'd cry, she says. They both laugh. And then quietly she adds, we didn't know anything back then. He shrugs. We still don't. But we try better, she replies. That makes him pause. Then he says, trying is the most romantic thing we've ever done. She leans over, plants the first seed, and pats the soil flat. Then, let's keep being romantic. Historians still argue whether love was allowed to grow with age in medieval marriage. Some documents focus solely on childbearing dowries and land, but tucked into personal letters, poetry, and the quiet records of estate households are hints that the longer the union, the deeper the companionship. That love wasn't always fiery, but it could be fertile. That evening, they sit under the open window. The breeze has changed it, no longer claws but brushes like a hesitant apology for winter. She's shelling peas. He's mending the wooden handle of a trowel. Occasionally, he glances at her, not out of concern, just because the light looks different on her face today. You're quiet, she says without looking up. I'm remembering, he answers. She tilts her head. Good memories, he nods. Mostly. Some sharp ones, too. But even those soften when I look at you. She stops shelling for a moment, looks over, and says nothing, because nothing else needs to be said. You feel a shift again, not in the air, but in time. This is not just another spring. This is a marked return, a loop completed. They have built something here that doesn't bloom all at once, but over and over in seasons and small things. And as the candle flickers low and the breeze carries the scent of tilled earth through the cottage, you realize some love stories aren't made of fireworks. They're made of seeds, planted together, tended through frost, and still reaching for the sun. The rain comes softly at first, barely more than a hush, against the thatched roof, like fingers drumming on a well-worn table. You barely notice it until she pauses at the window, holding her breath for a moment, as if recognizing an old friend. Then she exhales, smiles faintly, and says, "Good for the beans." He's already pulling the kettle from the hook, setting it on the fire. Not because he's cold, but because he knows she'll want something warm while she watches the rain. It's routine now, but not dull, like rereading a favorite page and still finding something new. Mainstream fact. In the Middle Ages, rain wasn't simply weather, it was omen blessing and conversation. It dictated when to plant, when to stay in, even when to propose marriage. In many households, people believed spring rain could renew not just crops, but luck. And some couples would time important decisions, like renewing contracts or attempting to conceive with the rhythms of rainfall. They sit by the window together, not for long, not on purpose, just long enough for the thunder to grumble low in the distance and the scent of wet wood to settle deep into the walls. Her hands rest in her lap, his arms crossed like he's holding in a thought. She watches the rain. He watches her watch it. You always look for patterns, he says. She shrugs. They're always there, if you wait. He nods, then adds, sometimes you just make them up. She grins. That's the fun part. They don't speak again for some time. Just sit while rivulets trickle down the glass in thin silver threads. Each drop finds its way down like it remembers the path from last year. Quirky tidbit. In rural regions of medieval Wales, lovers would make promises to one another by whispering beneath an oak tree during the first spring storm. The belief was that words spoken during rain traveled farther into the soil, into the heart, and even into the next life. These promises weren't legally binding, but many couples treated them as sacred. Later in the afternoon, she brings out the chest, the one at the foot of their bed. Inside are bits and pieces, a ribbon from a festival long forgotten, the clasp from an old shawl, a coin saved from the worst year, a small wooden carving shaped like a bird. He pretends not to notice her, brushing away a tear as she lifts the bird. You carved this when we couldn't afford kindling, she murmurs. He chuckles. It was that or go mad from waiting. She turns the little carving in her fingers. We waited for everything, didn't we? She says. Yes, he replies. But we always waited together. She places it back in the box, like a seed returning to earth, then closes the lid. Historians still argue whether objects of affection, tokens, mementos, played any real role in the emotional depth of medieval marriage. While many such keepsakes were dismissed in inventories as trifles, modern researchers suggest these items carry deep emotional weight, especially in unions that lacked formal courtship memory-making, became a kind of private language between spouses. That evening, the power of the storm peaks, not violently, but with presence, the kind that turns firelight into a necessity rather than ambiance. The rain drums louder, the wind flirts with the shutters, and in that tight space, surrounded by the sounds of weather, they both reach out, fingers intertwined, now not by instinct, but intention. You scared? He asks. She shakes her head. You know, he says, not anymore. And he means more than the storm. Dinner is a modest affair, soft cheese slices of rye, a few early greens. But they eat slowly, as if tasting peace. Afterward, she reads from a worn book of poetry. He doesn't catch every word, his eyes are closed, the rhythm lulling him. But she reads anyway, not for comprehension, but comfort. Her voice is low and steady, and you realize it's the same tone she once used to soothe their child. There's a poem about ivy clinging to old walls. She pauses, says softly, "That's us." He opens one eye. "Strong." She smiles, persistent. Same thing. The rain continues through the night. Not violently, not suddenly. Just enough to remind you that the world outside keeps moving, reshaping, nourishing. Inside, though, you see no need to move. You feel once again that love here is not declared loudly. It is planted, watered, weathered, and still alive. The storm has passed, and the world outside looks washed clean. You hear the drip-drip of rainwater from the eaves, each drop a slow punctuation mark at the end of last night's story. The garden is soaked, the trees darkened with moisture, and the air smells like wet wood moss and something faintly metallic, like memory. Inside the house, there's a certain stillness, not silence, not stasis, just that comfortable in-betweenness where nothing urgent demands attention. A soft moment where time stretches and everything important is already within reach. He's fixing a drawer that sticks, not because it's broken more, because it's always stuck, and today feels like a good day to finally do something about it. She's restitching the hem of a curtain, pulling each thread taut with the patience of someone who has restitched things before: sleeves, wounds, silences. Mainstream fact. In medieval households, domestic repair was a constant shared duty. Most couples, especially in rural settings, worked side by side to maintain their homes, with women responsible for textiles, food preservation, and medicine, and men often handling tools, repairs, and livestock. These tasks weren't grand gestures, but they were the scaffolding of a shared life. They work without much talking. But then, midway through folding the curtain, she says, "Do you think we ever lied to ourselves?" He looks up, not alarmed, just curious about how easy this would be. He considers it, runs a finger along the smooth grain of the drawer. "No," he says finally. "I think we knew, and we did it anyway." He nods. "That's the brave part, I suppose." She smiles. "I liked us better when we were foolish." "We still are," he says, and for a second they both laugh. And then they don't, because they're remembering the parts that weren't funny. Quirky tidbit. In some medieval Germanic regions, couples could declare an unofficial form of reconciliation after a fight by tying knots into small strips of cloth. These cloths were then placed under the mattress or hung above the hearth. The superstition held that if the knots held through the next full moon, the relationship would too. Later, they opened the drawer together. Inside are odds and ends, a tarnished spoon, dried lavender, wrapped in linen, a few coins no longer in use, and at the very back, folded and nearly forgotten, a small note in her handwriting. He reads it aloud softly. "Don't forget the good days. He doesn't remember when she wrote it. She doesn't either. But they both remember needing to hear it. She slides it into the corner again, gently, like tucking in a child. You ever think about the ways we almost didn't make it? She asks. All the time, he replies. And we still did. That night over dinner, she brings up a loophole. Remember when we tried that silent agreement rule? He winces playfully. We weren't ready for it. You tried to signal everything with eyebrow lifts. You banged every pot in the kitchen. She laughs. It's a deep laugh, the kind that shakes loose dust from the corners of the heart. Historians still argue whether communication in medieval marriages was as emotionally rich as in modern unions. While most historical records show transactional language, wills, contracts, dowries, some letters and poems reveal a more nuanced, tender exchange between spouses, particularly those who weathered decades together. Scholars debate whether emotional literacy was the exception or the rule. As the fire settles and the room dims, they take stock, not aloud, not with lists, just in the way they glance at the shelves they built, the blanket they mended, the seeds they planted, the notes they kept. Love in its later years is less about proving and more about preserving. You feel it in the way they pause before bed, one hand brushing against the other's without gripping. You feel it in the quiet nod when she snuffs the candle. And you feel it in the final words of the day. Same drawer tomorrow, same drawer. Love is what happens when two people stay and choose again and again, even when the drawer sticks. Morning doesn't knock today, it simply arrives, slipping in through the slits of the shutter and pooling at the foot of the bed like an old house cat that knows it's welcome. There is no rooster this time, no bells, just the gentle shifting of the world outside as the wind hushes the branches and the sunlight climbs across the beams. She's already awake, sitting at the edge of the bed, one foot gently swinging in the air. Her robe is draped over her shoulders, and she's combing her hair in long, slow strokes. You can hear the whisper of bristles through silver strands. He stirs, not suddenly, just enough to let her know he's with her in the room again. You're up early, he murmurs. She nods without turning. Didn't want to miss today. He blinks into the light. What's today? She smiles. Just another good one. Mainstream fact. In medieval households, especially among older couples, the rhythms of daily life became almost ceremonial. Tasks were not rushed. They were ritual. Lighting the fire, grinding grain, fetching water, each act repeated, not because it was new, but because it was familiar, like a well-worn path between two hearts that chose to walk together for decades. He eventually joins her in the garden. They check the beans. No sprouts yet, but she swears she feels them. He believes her. They prune water, pat soil, and between the work there are stories, not big ones, just little memories resurfacing in the damp morning air. Remember when you thought time was a weed, she teases. You said it was good for headaches, he replies. And did it work? He pauses. You stopped yelling. So, Yes, she laughs, then gently swats his shoulder. The rhythm continues. Kneel, clip, laugh, pause. And you realize the real harvest isn't in the plants. It's in the silence between them that no longer needs filling. Quirky tidbit. In parts of 14th century France, some elderly couples would carve their initials into the handles of shared tools, a symbolic gesture to show that even the objects of daily life bore witness to their union. Some of these tools have been found by archaeologists, initials barely legible but still side by side. Later, they return inside for lunch. Simple fare. Again bread with the last of the soft cheese, pickled turnips, and a slice of cold roast. He pours the cider. She lights the small lantern on the shelf, even though it's still midday. Old habit. She shrugs. I like the flicker. They eat slowly. She dips her bread, watching the oil shimmer. He wipes his chin, chuckling. Still eat like a knight at war. She grins. And you still chew like you're counting. He raises an eyebrow. I am. Counting what? The years, the days, the blessings. Her expression softens. They don't finish the bread, but they finish the moment. Historians still argue whether long-term love in medieval Europe was rooted more in duty or affection. While noble marriages were often arranged for alliance, many peasant couples had greater choice. Anecdotal evidence, oral histories, folk songs, shared property suggests that some of the deepest bonds grew from quiet, consistent presence over decades, not sudden passion. That night, they sit by the fire one last time. The flames dance lower than usual. Their shadows on the wall are tall but soft around the edges, like the past still looming but no longer sharp. She leans into him. He doesn't move, just rests his hand over hers. Neither says anything, because nothing needs to be said. You watch the fire too. It crackles, sputters, glows, then dims, and the house feels full of days, of choices, of small, perfect silences. And now the light has faded into the walls. The air has settled. The fire has gone from flame to ember, and even the garden outside has fallen still. You're not quite sure when the world got so quiet, but you notice that your breathing has slowed to match it. You've been with them, these two, for what feels like a lifetime. Maybe longer. And somehow you don't feel like a guest anymore. Your eyes grow heavier, but you don't fight it. There's nothing more to understand tonight. Only this love, the kind that lasts, isn't always found in grand gestures or whispered poetry. Sometimes it's a shared spoon, a drawer that finally slides, a nod across a garden, a smile at breakfast, a laugh in the middle of a thunderstorm. Sometimes it's just sitting in the same room through the years, choosing again and again not to leave. Outside, the wind is quiet, not gone, just resting. Inside, the two of them sleep in the same bed they always have, her hand on his chest, his breath in rhythm with hers. You let yourself feel the warmth of the fire still glowing behind your eyes. You let yourself remember the garden, the bread, the silence, and finally, you let yourself sleep. Good night.